Thank you, Anita. And I look forward to the readings to come later with the 12 writers. May I request those of you who have not yet done so to kindly switch off your phones, because some of the guests might have come here for a quiet nap, and why disturb them? The hidden life of words. Most families have special words that are unique to the family, but don't make sense outside of that family. I think two words that do make sense outside the family and are kind of generally used now and almost universal are kaka and susu. But that apart, there are specific words and specific usages that are very, very special to families. I remember when our son was very young, he used to call the and there's no logic involved. He used to call the television remote control. He used to call it the fish. For what reason? Nobody knows. And we continue to do so even today. He's 28. I'm almost 35 myself, and we continue to do so. There's something charming about this. There's something charming about specific sort of family words. Another I remember is that he used to be very upset that about Simon and Garfunkel. He saw no reason why Garf should have uncle and Simon was without the uncle. So he would say Simon uncle and Garfunkel and feel very pleased about that. So this meant Simon uncle in our family means somebody who has got his due. So this is how words are used and words sort of grow. When I use a word, said Humpty Dumpty in Alice in Wonderland, if you remember, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. Hidden lives of words are present in other contexts too. Most philosophers agree, for example, that it's impossible to know what another person is thinking. It's impossible to convey your own thoughts to another person. There might be arguments about this. There might be people who think that it's a very cute argument, but it's generally felt that if you even, however close you are to a person, you have no way of knowing exactly what he or she is thinking. So it's a bit. Writing is a bit like, as George Orwell said, it's a perversion of words. You're trying to use words in ways that hopefully approximate the meaning, but there's no way of knowing whether they do. It's not like maths. I mean, 2 + 2 is 4 every single time. But your nationalism might be different from my nationalism, might be different from somebody else's nationalism. So these are words that kind of come and cause a lot of trouble, really. When I was growing up, when my generation was growing up, actually, some of you might remember, I don't know if that still happens in school. In schools, we were taught poetry by Wordsworth and Keats and Shelley. And when Wordsworth, for example, wandered lonely as a cloud, he assures us, all at once he saw a host of golden daffodils. We'll have to take his word for it. I certainly had to, because I had not seen a daffodil. And there were words in the English language that one had no real familiarity with when we were studying in India, because, I mean, what was a daffodil? You knew, the teacher explained to you, he said, it's a flower, it's colored in such a way, and when you see a whole field of daffodils, this is the color that you see, and sort of tried to sort of help you along the route to understanding. But it didn't work. I mean, you still, so a lot of what we learned in school, certainly a lot of what I learned in school, had to be, we had to use our imagination to understand certain things. It didn't matter who the writer was. I mean, all our favorites, the Enid Blytons and the Mark Twains and the Dickens and the Austens and George Eliot's, all introduced us to words that were beyond our immediate experience. They were words and they meant something, but not to us, and not to us in our sort of where in our milieu, where we were living and studying. And they talked about words for objects we had not seen. This always caused a problem because it took a long while to put the word and the object together. We, of course, all of us, well, I was going to say intelligent, but I think all of us, regardless of intelligent, what we did was we localized these words. We kind of adapted them. We kind of we used daffodils. We saw daffodils as flowers which are available in our gardens. We saw certain words that were used which we had no clue, but we sort of ensured that the understanding or the enjoyment of the poem or the lesson wasn't spoiled by the fact that we didn't understand specific words. And this kind of localization helped because it meant that the story could go on and you were not caught between words, so to say, and you didn't, the words themselves didn't stymie you. So I'll give you a few examples. We knew, of course, what snow was, but I mean, I studied in Bangalore. I studied in Baldwin's in Bangalore, and however pithily and however, what's the word, excitedly, the English teacher tried to tell us what snow was, he hadn't seen snow either. So it was a bit like explaining blue or pink or red or green to a blind man, visually challenged man. Although at least a couple of visually challenged people I know are happier to be known as blind people rather than this roundabout way of saying it. But that's by the way. Thus, snow and scones and gollywogs and corsets were converted into a familiar sort of set of words through a leap of the imagination. V.S. Naipaul has written a wonderful essay called Jasmine. I think he wrote it in the 60s, where he talks about this disconnect between words, this disconnect between the word and its meaning. And it's a lovely essay called Jasmine. I mean, his daffodil was the jasmine. And he talks about visiting this lady, and he says that she was sitting in the veranda, and he went up to her, and he said, I could get this very familiar smell. And I knew what it was, but I didn't know what it was. So I asked the lady, what was that? What is that? She said, that's a flower. And he said, great, so what do you call it? And she said, we call it the jasmine. And this is what Naipaul says. It's a lovely quote. He says, jasmine. So I had known it all these years. To me, it had been a word in a book, a word to play with, something removed from the dull vegetation I knew. Jasmine, jasmine. But the word and the flower had been separate in my mind for too long. They did not come together. And I kind of understand that, and I kind of understand the fact that you can know a word and you can know about a word and not put it together in your head. Not simply because words have a hidden life, but also because you are not sure what the pressure points are. You don't know what sets off something in your mind, which may or may not be exactly what the word is. Jasmine existed, and so did daffodils, of course. But there's a delightful story, there's a delightful book written by Douglas Adams. Yes, the same Douglas Adams of The Meaning of Life and Everything, which of course we know is 42. It's called The Meaning of Life. He says, have you wondered what the pleasing coolness on the reverse side of the pillow is called, or the art of being able to balance the cold and hot shower taps? What about someone who continually annoys you by continually apologizing for annoying you, or the panic caused by only half hearing an announcement at the airport? All of us know these feelings. We also know people who offer to help after all the work is done, or the safe place where you put something and then forgot where it was. And his sort of solution was this. He said, there are these words, there are these thoughts and feelings and emotions and objects that have no specific meaning in the words in the English language. And then there are these wonderful names of places in Scotland and in Ireland and in UK in general, places of small villages, hamlets, tiny towns, which are on these signposts. And his argument is that what are these words doing? They're just hanging around on signposts. Let's make them useful. Let's sort of appropriate them from those signposts, and let's attach meanings to them. These specific meanings to them. So he'd get a word from a Scottish town, and then he'd say, well, this means that that funny feeling you get when you wave at somebody you think you know and he ignores you, or something like that. So it's a way of developing a new dictionary where you think that there are more things. There are, as somebody else said in another context, there are more things on heaven and earth than are dreamed of in our philosophies, and these more things are not being properly given their place, given the right place in the sort of lexicon of a word. Language is an archive of history, and additions may signal a new political movement, a recent discovery, or a sweeping change in attitudes. Admittedly, Douglas's is an artificial technique just to raise a laugh, but there is an organic manner in which new words are added to the language that highlight our development or regression, as the case might be. You just have to think jihad or laser or African American, fatwa, alcohol, and you know how these recent words have not just described our condition, but also are kind of emotionally loaded words. I particularly like the word alcohol because many years ago when I was reporting cricket from Sharjah, which is a dry city, there was a gentleman from India who was from one of the newspapers, and he told me, he said, Suresh, what's wrong with this city? I said, yeah, what are you talking about? He says, I go out in the evening, I can see Al-Kabir, I can see Al-Shabaab, I can see Al-Shab, but where is alcohol? I said, alcohol is not available. But what he didn't realize was that there was an irony to this, because the word alcohol itself is derived from Arabic. It comes from the word alcohol, which comes from the coal that we are familiar with down here. And the process of the distillation of the coal is a similar process, well, not similar, but can be a similar process to the distillation of wine. And when they wanted a word for that, there was a ready-made word, so alcohol came into play. This hidden life, which we started with, is also apparent here, because jihad leads to terrorism, leads to the famous or unhappy choice where we say one man's terrorism is another man's freedom fighter. So the words are charged with meanings. Words are charged with meanings not just of the dictionary, but you'd be amazed at the influences that create such charged words. Popular culture, the movies, writing, and today, of course, television, especially the screaming, shouting type, chest-beating type, which we're all familiar with. And there's nothing you can do about it. This is words. The clear thing about words is that you cannot control how words are put into circulation. You have no control over how words are distorted in their meaning. You have no control over how words can be can mean something completely different from what the original meaning was. Patriotism, for example, which till the other day was accepted as love for the country, is now being redefined. It means the acceptance of the government, right or wrong. It means anti-Pakistan. It means the inability to tolerate another's point of view. It has kept a whole lot of us in columnists and in good working condition. And of course, among us is a gentleman who's probably has the loudest and the fairest voice in this. Ram Guha sitting right here, and to understand how to understand this kind of development, I think you simply need to read Ram, and it'll help you understand how words degenerate. There is a Gresham's law which applies to words. The bad usages tend to drive out the good. Gresham was talking about money. Gresham was talking about how in a situation the bad notes, the bad currency notes tend to drive out the good. And I think it's the same with usages. Or perhaps the word has always had a sort of hidden life. The word patriotism or nationalism have always had a hidden life, which is only now emerging thanks to patriots and nationalists willing to let the other man die for his beliefs. Or maybe something got lost in the translation. There's something about translation also which gives words a sort of a sideways kind of a meaning which may not be apparent immediately. There's a wonderful book by Umberto Eco which is called Rat or Mouse, and it's a book on translation. And Eco talks about how in a specific situation you have to use precise words. For example, he gives the example of Hamlet charging at Polonius and stabbing him behind the curtains, and he says, "How now, a rat?" And that's how he kills Polonius. And Eco tells us that this is the precise word for betrayal. You cannot say, "How now, a mouse," and do it. It'll probably just mean that Polonius was henpecked or something completely different, and I don't think that was Shakespeare's idea at all. Words are also symbols. I don't think we need to go too deeply into this, but words stand for other words. Words signify other words. But there's also, the reverse is also true. There's a wonderful experiment done by Dr. V.S. Ramachandran, who's the brain person and who's best known for his artificial limbs, the phantom limb sort of experiments, which were extremely successful. He called it the Kiki Booba syndrome, and he drew this in many of his lectures, some of which I've attended. He drew this sort of sharp-edged sort of star, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8-sided star on one side of the board, and on the other he'd have a sort of a kind of a very curved and sort of meandering kind of a figure. And he'd ask the audience, I have 2 words with me, Kiki and Booba, and which is which in the drawing? And 90%, if not everybody who answered, would say that Kiki was a sharp-edged picture, whereas Booba was the rounded. And so there is something that maybe there is something. One doesn't talk with such absolute certainty. Maybe there is something about words and symbols that symbols obviously predate words, but maybe there's something in words, because apparently even children and even people who are illiterate, who don't know Booba or Kiki except sort of as words, as sounds in their ears, tend to say that Kiki is the sharp-edged one and Booba is the other. Now that's a remarkable commentary on how we approach words. It's a remarkable commentary on how there are deep and hidden aspects of words which are not immediately apparent. And if you do dig deep enough, and one final word before I end this, and that word is Clunes. Now, Clunes is a small hamlet located on the west shore of the Scottish Highlands. This is a fact. I'm not making this up. It is also the word that Douglas Adams has used to mean people who just won't go. I don't want to be a Clune. So thank you very much and goodbye.